Hello Synapse community, my name is Ryan Majitimer, and I'm a product manager on the Azure Synapse Analytics team. Welcome to the December edition of the Learn Synapse series. If you recall from last month, we took a look at how to ingest metadata-driven data from a D365 business application. And this month, we're going to look at how you can use a dataflow to join two different data sets in your Azure Data Lake storage. All right, we're going to be using some sample data from the NYC trips dataset. Well, let's jump in. We can look in our ADLS dataset for trip small with trips of NYC city taxis and payment type that describes payment types like credit cards or cash. We're going to be joining those datasets. To create a new data flow, we need to jump to the Develop Hub, then select Add New Resource, and then click on Data Flow option and give it a name. It's a good practice to enable the Data Flow debug option in the top of our screen, which is setting up a cluster under the hood. This might take a minute to go if you're running this for the very first time. Now we're good to add our first data source called trips. We're going to define our dataset to pull data from our ADLS Gen 2 and select Parquet format. We add a meaningful name for our dataset and then use our default connection as a linked service to our data lake used by the Synapse workspace. Next, we navigate to our bronze layer in our data lake and choose the appropriate folder to reach our Parquet file. This is going to be yellow_tripdata_2022-06 Parquet file. Then we hit OK. Now, we can preview our data by clicking on the Data Preview tab and click Refresh. This shows us sample data of our dataset, including the key column that we'll be using to join our second dataset, payment type, a numeric column that allows us to identify the payment type. Let's add the second data source called payment type. We created a new connection to our ADLS Gen 2. This time we select CSV as the format type. Again, we give our dataset a name and define the same linked service that we used before. Then, we navigate to the bronze layer and to the payment type folder, and then select our CSV file. An important thing to remember here is to select the first row as header. Otherwise, our columns are returned as anonymous. Again, we can preview this data. Notice that we now have payment type ID that we'll be using to join the previous dataset for trips. Now it's time to join the data. So we hit the plus sign at the right side of our dataset and then select the Join Transformation shape. Let's give it a meaningful name and then select our payment type dataset as our right stream. Then we select our left outer join because we want to show all of our trips from the dataset even if we don't find any corresponding rows in payment type dataset. Then we select the columns that we're going to use for the join. Payment type on the left side and payment type ID on the right side. Notice now that there's a challenge around the data types for those two columns. Our left column is a long data type, while the right column is a string data type. We must align both data types, so we hit our plus sign to add a derived column to do the transformation for a specific column. In this case, we're going to use our current payment type ID column, and at the right, open our expression builder, a very similar experience as Microsoft Excel formulas, and we search in the expression values for toLong function, which will allow us to convert any type to long number, if that is possible, of course. We select this function, and then perform the operation on payment type ID. Now, we go again to our join shape, and click on that to change our right stream from payment type to our convert payment new column that we just transformed. And now we can see that the data type for both columns is aligned. The next step is to aggregate the data. So, we added a new aggregation shape, and we're going to group by payment type name from our payment type data source. For aggregates, we'll be using the total amount column coming from the trips data source. And we're going to perform an aggregation, so we'll be opening again the expression builder and then search for the sum function, and then use that function against our total amount field. We can then preview the data from our aggregation step, and we can see that the data has been aggregated by payment type named column. Then, we added a new sync shape as the last step to write our data back to our ADLS Gen 2. We'll be writing the output as a new Parquet file. Next, we give the newly generated dataset a name and select the folder to land our file in our sandbox folder, and then NYC taxi subfolder, and finally the result. We can also define dumping the result as one single file, and we select that as our file name option from the dropdown. This option requires setting this output as a single partition, which could impact performance for big data, but in this case, since we're working with small data sets, it's not going to be an issue for us. The last option is to define the name of the file expected as an output of our data flow. We can publish all of our artifacts, our data flow, and our underlying datasets. To use our data flow, we need to leverage a data pipeline. So first, we need to move to our Integrate Data Hub and click on the plus icon to define a new pipeline. We can check the Move and Transform options for our data flow shape that we can move to our canvas and give our pipeline a name. Then we've added a name for our data flow shape, and in the Settings tab, we use the drop-down to use the existing data flow that we created before. The last step is to select the Debug option to start running the pipeline. Once I clicked on that option, we can check and monitor that our pipeline is running, including some details of the execution of the data flow as it goes. In the monitoring pane, we can see that our data flow execution has succeeded, and checking for the processing time, rows written, and so on. We can move on to our Data Hub again, and check in our ADLS Gen 2 and the Sandbox NYC Taxi result folder to see our output Parquet files, and perform a SQL script to see the content of our files. We can see that, as expected, the result has two columns, payment types and total amount. Well, that wraps up our video for today. We talked about a lot of things: aggregating columns, doing joins, setting up pipelines and data flows. Tell us in the comments, how are you using data flows in Synapse? Again, my name is Ryan Majitimer. You can find me on Twitter. You can find Synapse on Twitter, Azure_Synapse. You can also, if you like Twitter, if you like LinkedIn or other social media platforms, join the Azure Synapse Influencers. It's a very exciting program. There's all sorts of swag and private events, all sorts of fun stuff like that. Super easy, takes 2 seconds to sign up. Just a couple of answers of questions, handles, what's that other thing? Aliases? I don't know. Social media stuff. It's very fun. Find more information in the description for this video. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.